One of the things that makes RED unique is its after-capture approach to something called debayering. We're going to go over what a Bayer filter actually does and why debayering can take so much effort from your workstation. The light-sensitive surface of a camera is made up of millions of tiny light-sensitive components called photosites. The light-sensitive part of the camera chip contains a grid of these tiny things. When light strikes a photosite, it generates a signal based on the light that strikes it, and this then corresponds to a pixel on the recorded image. The light that strikes a photosite is converted to a numeric value within the image or footage file. This happens millions of times per second, and the resulting flood of data is then encoded by the camera into a footage file or stored as a RAW file depending on the camera. Now, if we're talking about a monochrome image, that's pretty much it. In a black and white image, all the R, G and B values of any individual pixel will be the same. Remember how the image goes black and white when all three waves in the parade line up perfectly. But with colour, things get more complicated. Colour sensors work differently. On a monochrome sensor, each photosite will absorb all colours of light. In a colour sensor, each photosite can only absorb a single colour of light. This is down to a colour filter array, a set of coloured filters that allow only red, green or blue light to filter through and strike any individual photosite. There are multiple patterns of colour filter array, and the most popular and widespread is the Bayer pattern, hence the term Bayer pattern filter. The Bayer pattern filter overlays coloured filters over the photosites in the camera's sensor in a pattern of two alternating rows. One row alternates between green and blue filters, whilst the other alternates between red and green filters. This means that there are twice as many green photosites compared to either red or blue. And this is because the human eye is actually more sensitive to green light compared to red or blue light. In fact, green light actually contributes about twice as much to perceived brightness as either of the other two colours. This has the pleasant effect of producing an image with more perceived detail and less perceived noise compared to all three colours being given equal focus. So at this point we have an incomplete image. It looks too green and we don't actually have any complete colour information for any pixel yet. Every single pixel is either red, green or blue. What needs to happen now is that we need to somehow work out the true colour values for each pixel. This is where demosaicing comes into play, and in particular we're talking about debayering, as we used a Bayer pattern filter in our red camera to begin with. The camera uses a demosaicing algorithm to work out a pixel's full colour value, and this can vary depending on a number of things. We're not going into the nitty-gritty of how a demosaicing algorithm actually arrives at its conclusion, because that knowledge won't help us be better colorists. But the algorithm will take stock of a number of factors and fill in the full colour values of pixels based on the colours of surrounding pixels, perceived edges in the image, and other factors depending on that camera. Now, these algorithms aren't perfect. In fact, the commonly seen moire pattern is an artifact of demosaicing going wrong and making mistakes in areas of high-density, fine detail. So finally onto where this affects us in the grade in real terms. Red RAW files are recorded with this Bayer pattern filter and are not debayered at the point of capture. Red files are debayered to the highest quality afterwards during post. This means that our workstation is applying the full debayering algorithm as we work with the red RAW files in Resolve. This is why the premium quality decode slows us down. We are carrying out this full quality debayering operation on our hardware, and for 8K files, well, that's a lot of work. The practical takeaways from this don't seem to be too numerous at first, but we simply need to know that the premium quality decode gives us the best final image quality. However, a lot of what we've covered actually has practical applications during the grade. We'll go further into how understanding colour science can help us when grading later, but it's worth remembering what we've covered here, particularly about the green-red-blue balance inherent in the Bayer pattern filter. This has been a fairly in-depth look at the Bayer pattern filter. Once you're ready, click on through to the next lecture. Right, so we are going to take a look at how to decode red raw footage, or R3D footage. This is a lot easier than it used to be. So let's take a look. I've conformed this timeline, and in the next section you'll go ahead and conform your own timeline, so don't worry about that for now, you'll get to this point in good time. I'm going to hit the gear in the lower right, and I'm going to go to Camera Raw Settings. You will be on Master Settings to begin with. We want to go to Camera Raw Settings. Now by default, you'll be on ARRI Alexa RAW profile. We need to click this drop down and go down to RED, R-E-D. And what we want to do is set our decode here. If I take a look at my footage, it's too warm and it looks wrong, it's a bit weird, it's not exactly what we would expect from a very high-end camera. So what we need to do is we need to decode it correctly, because this is the red default decode and it's always garbage. We need to do this much better. So back to camera raw, we've got decode quality. So the first thing we're going to do is set the debayer decode quality. Now we've just talked about what the debayer actually is, and we've talked a little bit about premium debayering for R3D footage, but let's expand on that. The second option down is decode quality. This lets me choose the extent to which the footage is debayered within Resolve. We have good, which is partially, and we have premium, which is fully. We also have different forms of what we call resolution subsampling, or kind of resolution sampling here, going from half resolution down to 1/16. Now, we can't arbitrarily choose resolution numbers when we do this. We can't say, I want this footage to be processed in 720, for example. It has to be a fraction of the actual resolution of the file. So we can go half, quarter, eighth, yeah, okay? I would strongly recommend that quarter res is the lowest you ever go. At 1/8 and 1/16, details just become too blurry and smeared and blocky to really work with. Half res and quarter res will spare your machine a little bit of the effort, but they don't give a great image. Half res premium gives a pretty good image. We should shoot for that if our workstations can support it. Full res premium is the whole thing. We should really go for that ideally, but the truth is a lot of workstations can't manage that. This one can, but I'll keep it on half res good for now. I'm going to keep it on half res good, and I'm probably going to go to premium later on in this demonstration. Now, you can freely switch between all of these whenever you like without impacting your grade. It's not going to do any damage, it's not going to undermine your secondaries, it's not going to make your tracking stop working or any of that stuff. So I'm going to stick with half res good for now. But down here is what we want to take a look at. Decode using red default, camera metadata, or project. If I hit camera metadata and then choose save, what it's going to do is it'll make everything look a lot better. It's going to decode the footage with the settings that were in the camera at the time it was shot. And if you're working very quickly, this is akin to having a Rec 709 LUT. Okay, this is just the camera settings applied to your decode. It takes the raw into a good starting image. And if I were working very quickly, I would use this as a starting point. But let's take a look at some more in-depth options as well. So if I go down to decode using project, and remember to get up here I just hit the gear in the lower right, I have all kinds of options down here. I have color science, color space, and gamma curve. Now this used to be a minefield for decoding red. We had literally thousands of combinations of different settings. As of the new IPP2 pipeline, we don't have that problem anymore. What we have is one very simple blanket decode setting for the absolute majority of red footage. What we do is we set color science to IPP2, color space to red wide gamut RGB, and gamma curve to log3 G10. This decode will suit the absolute majority of R3D footage that you deal with. It used to be we had different color spaces and different color sciences that were better for maybe being underwater, or one of them was a slight improvement on skin tones if you were using a certain OLF filter, all kinds of complicated situational stuff. Now, for the absolute majority of red footage, if you're working in SDR, this is your decode. That's pretty much all you need to know for now. It's just these three settings: IPP2, red wide gamut RGB, log3 G10. We can choose to apply metadata curves. This applies some contrast curves that were stored in the camera. Every now and again that doesn't make a huge difference, so we can uncheck that if we want, and we'll see it makes a kind of a difference here. but either or, that doesn't make a big change for us. Then further down, we have the Use Camera Metadata options. Now these are quite important. This allows us to selectively use the ISO, exposure, temperature and tint functions from the camera. It will go looking in the file and it will look at what the camera was doing at the time the footage was shot, and it will apply those settings to the decode for us. I typically like to use ISO and color temperature here, because by default the red color temperature is 5600 Kelvin, which is very, very orange. It's what we call D56. And it's not a great white point. It's not a great color balance for the majority of work that we're going to do, or for all of the work that we're going to do, and for the absolute majority of work that you're going to do. So ISO and color temperature are pretty good. You can go for exposure adjustment as well if you choose. Tint, I've never really had it make a huge difference. Then we'll hit save, and then we've got the ISO and the color balance from the camera in a nice, smooth, flat log image that we can then work on. And grade just as we would normally. We can now, at this point, go ahead and grade as though it were any other footage. This just allows us to get the red raw into a good starting point. And that's honestly it. If you're working in SDR and you're working with red, this decode will see you right for the absolute majority of footage. Now this is reasonably old footage now. It's relatively old footage. It was from a red Scarlet. And the thing about IPP2 is that it's backwards compatible. So even old and legacy and archive stuff from older red cameras still plays nice with this decode. So you don't have to worry about versioning issues like that either. The IPP2 pipeline has made this much easier. So we can just go ahead and recap this. We'll hit the gear, make sure we're in profile red. We can choose our debayer quality. Now that I'm done, I think I'll go for half res premium. Decode using project. Our color science should be IPP2. Our gamma curve should be log 3G10. And our color space should be red wide gamut RGB. Apply metadata curves is optional should we want to do that. We can then go down to the bottom and we can make sure that we check ISO and color temperature under the camera metadata options. Then we'll hit save, and there we now have our decoded flat log images, and we can begin working on this project. So just take a look at all of these settings and make sure you're okay, and then go ahead and conform your XML, which we will do at the beginning of the next section. So click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Now, before we launch into this one, it's not going to have a huge impact on how we work in the grade. In fact, it just affects our workstation performance. It doesn't have much impact on the creative aspects of the grade beyond that. Though it's a helpful bit of knowledge to have, and plenty of clients don't know about the red compression ratio. Red footage can be captured with a number of different data rates, which are all denoted by compression ratios. These ratios run from 20:1 all the way to 3:1, with lower ratios denoting better quality of image and also a larger file size. Now, when I first worked with red, I had a problem. I had some shots that just ran super slowly on my workstation at the time, whilst others were absolutely fine. I had no idea why until later. These clips had different compression ratios, and the larger files were the ones playing back more slowly during the grade. In fact, red footage is encoded with a variable data rate codec. This means that an image with more complex color information will actually be larger than an image with less varied info going in. A firework display in full tilt will produce a larger file compared to an identical duration of a pure black night sky, or in this case a seaside. Anyway, back to the subject of compression ratio. Certain clients may want to record with lower compression ratios for shorter form projects like ads meant for television. Those productions don't typically produce the same volume of content as a feature film, and they can afford to use a very high-end ratio like 5:1. Other productions, such as short films, serial-length projects and features, will have to compromise in order to manage their file storage. Just be sure to talk to your client and find out what ratio they are using. If they've been foolish and recorded in a 3:1 compression ratio, then the footage is only going to make an almighty demand on your file storage read and write speeds. It may well not play back in real time at all. Now, the reason I'm including all of this in this course is because I've had clients come to me for advice on this. They've wanted to know what ratio they should use and why, and just in case that happens to you, I want you to know this as well. The high-end ratio is 5:1. This is considered by most to be the sweet spot for file size and image quality. Now, that's not to say that 5:1 is a compromise. In fact, the CEO of Red himself has come out and said that the 3:1 ratio is essentially a placebo. There's almost no perceptible gain between 5:1 and 3:1, and the file size of 3:1 is frankly ridiculous. There's rarely a reason to shoot 3:1 ratio. If your client is shooting a short ad or a corporate piece, then a compression ratio of 5:1 is justifiable, and will give you a final image of excellent quality. If your client is shooting a longer form project, then you have to take into account the amount of storage that is going to be involved. If a client has proudly amassed 100 terabytes of material, then practically speaking, how are you going to transfer that to anyone? Is anyone outside of a high-end facility likely to have access to high-speed storage of that volume? Not really. So choosing a higher ratio is the way to go here. The Red default of 8:1 is good. Ideally, we stick to 8:1 at the lowest and only go lower if there's a genuine cause to do that. We can also choose 7:1 if we're working on a shorter project like a short film, but we always take our storage into account here, and that also means the task of sending the footage to the next person in the pipeline, say, for example, the colorist. Now, this has been a decent bit of coverage on the subject of a compression ratio. Like I said before, it tends not to have a massive impact on the grade, and most Red users are savvy enough to know that 3:1 is not a wise choice. We're at the end of our Red module now. Once the next lecture is ready and available, go ahead and click on through.